The desolate landscape stretched out before me like a graveyard of twisted metal and charred earth. I trudged through the knee-deep mud, my boots heavy with the weight of my own exhaustion. The war had been raging for what felt like an eternity, and I'd lost count of the days since I'd last seen a friendly face. My name is Marcus, and I was a soldier. Or at least I used to be. Now, I was just a man consumed by a burning desire for revenge. I'd been separated from my unit during a chaotic retreat, and now I found myself alone and disoriented in unfamiliar surroundings. The last thing I remembered was the sound of gunfire and the screams of my comrades as they fell around me. I'd been running ever since, driven by a singular focus: to find the man who'd betrayed us all. His name was Victor, a former ally who'd turned against us in the heat of battle. I'd seen him flee, a traitor's smile spreading across his face as he left us to die. As I walked, the landscape shifted and twisted, like a living thing. I stumbled upon a ravaged village, the buildings reduced to rubble and ash. I moved cautiously, my rifle at the ready, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the distant rumble of artillery fire. I knew I was getting close. I could feel it in my bones. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps, light and cautious. I spun around, my heart racing, and that's when I saw him. Victor. He was standing behind a crumbling wall, a look of surprise on his face. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the tension between us palpable. Then, without a word, he turned and ran. I gave chase, my legs pumping as I pursued him through the ruins. We weaved in and out of the buildings, dodging debris and leaping over obstacles. I was gaining on him, my anger and adrenaline fueling my pursuit. Finally, I cornered him in a small, abandoned church. The doors creaked as I pushed them open, my rifle trained on Victor's trembling form. "You're a hard man to find," I spat, my voice low and deadly. Victor looked up at me, a mixture of fear and defiance in his eyes. "Marcus," he whispered, "I didn't think you'd make it." I took a step closer, my finger tightening on the trigger. "You betrayed us," I growled. "You left us to die." Victor shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I did what I had to do," he said. "I did what I thought was right." I laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Right?" I repeated. "You call betraying your own people right?" Quote. Victor's smile grew wider, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of madness in his eyes. "I call it survival," he said, "and I'd do it again in a heartbeat." I raised my rifle, my finger squeezing the trigger. But just as I was about to fire, a loud explosion rocked the ground beneath my feet. The church doors burst open, and a group of enemy soldiers stormed in, their guns blazing. Victor and I were forced to take cover, our differences momentarily forgotten in the face of a common enemy. As we fought side by side, I realized that my desire for revenge had blinded me to the true nature of the war. We were all just pawns in a much larger game, and Victor was just as much a victim as I was. When the dust finally settled, and the enemy had been repelled, Victor and I stood facing each other, our guns still smoking. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the tension between us still palpable. Then, without a word, Victor turned and walked away. I watched him go, feeling a sense of unease wash over me. I'd come seeking revenge, but in the end, I'd found something else, a reluctant truce with a man I'd sworn to kill. As I stood there, surrounded by the ruins of war, I realized that sometimes, the greatest enemy is not the one in front of you, but the one within.